Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to next instalment in the Airability Inspire Ability talks, lectures, and Q&A sessions. It's a real privilege for us to bring a little bit of airability into your homes during these crazy times, and to celebrate aviation, and today also to talk about some leadership stuff as well, which is great. It's another great flying day, but let's at least talk about airplanes, even if we can't fly them right now. As you know, Airability is working really hard to try and continue to bring aviation into the community to support everybody. And that's a real challenge. And obviously, like many charities, we're fighting to survive right now. And I wanted to tell you, just before I hand you over to our host, John Windover, that Airability is participating in the 2.6 Challenge. The 2.6 Challenge is a great scheme that's been run this Sunday by the guys that were running the London Marathon, organising it rather. And as you know, the London Marathon was taking place this Sunday, 26 miles on the 26th of April. So instead, they've set up something called the 2.6 Challenge, which is designed to try and help save UK charities. So Airability is part of that. A few of the staff, a few of the team are doing their challenges, but also I'm really excited to say that our speaker guest today is also going to do a 2.6 challenge. 2.6 obviously being a derivative of the 26. So 2.6 or 26, 260, everybody's doing a challenge. So I'll let our guest talk about that a little bit later. But please do support us if you can. Support our guest to raise funds for Airability. But I know he's looking forward to telling you guys about that today. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to John, our host. Hi, John.
Hi, Mike. Thank you very much. Well, another sunny day indeed. 3 weeks in, I don't think we've had a rainy day yet on these talks. So I'm looking out the window here, yearning to fly, but hopefully we're all behaving ourselves and taking the opportunity of the time we have, with our families to perhaps save some cash before we get those good flying days back for us. I've run the London Marathon a few times, and I remember a staggering statistic: £40 million is raised every year during the London Marathon. And so this 2.6 challenge really is a lifeline to many UK charities, not least Airability. So I know Mike will be informing you all how you can donate to keep your charity alive and well. And it's my absolute pleasure today to introduce Air Vice Marshal Gary Waterfall CBE to you all. I have a fantastic bio here by way of introduction to Gary. So what I'll do is I'll start off by giving you a potted history of Gary's distinguished career, and then we'll have a chat about the highlights, and then we'll finish with some really interesting Q&A. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions, so please do send your questions in. Mike will be monitoring those, and we'll be putting some of those questions to Gary a bit later on. So Gary spent 34 years in the Royal Air Force. He joined in 1985, and following training, he flew the Harrier in Germany and the UK, and was also the UK display pilot for the Harrier in 1996. That followed a 3-year term on the Royal Air Force aerobatic team, the Red Arrows. He commanded 41 Squadron at Coningsby, a test and evaluation squadron charged with evaluation of RAF frontline fast jet aircraft. In 2009, Gary assumed command of Joint Force Harrier, and in 2010 capped that off with the lead of the now famous Harrier 16-ship farewell flypast. In 2011, Gary was the UK Air Component Commander for Operation LME, the UK contribution to the NATO-led campaign in Libya. We'll be looking at some of the challenges around that, and some very, very interesting stories I'm sure that we'll all want to hear about that time in his career. Following this, Deputy Command of Air Security for the 2012 Olympics. More stories, Gary, there, I'm quite sure. Followed on by the Typhoon Force Commander in 2013. But on promotion to Air Vice Marshal in 2014, Gary became Air Officer Commanding 1 Group, a critical role in the Royal Air Force, charged with RAF combat air reconnaissance, air command and control, and battle space management. So a very unique insight into what is involved in that job. And we'll finish with looking at all those questions you've ever wanted to ask an Air Vice Marshal, perhaps never had the chance. So Gary, welcome. And how's lockdown going?
Hey, John, Mike, good morning. Thanks so much for the invite to come along and have a chat with you guys this morning. It's a great honour to be part of it. Lockdown is pretty good. As you say, it's a bit galling, isn't it? The weather's perfect for aviation today. I'm just looking out of my sort of office here in the garden. Weather's perfect. Petrol's never been cheaper. But it's good that we're all staying safe at homes and actually employing ways of communicating that we didn't really think was possible before, never really reached into, to keep the aviation community together, to keep the charity together, and hopefully sort of make some money at the same time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And talking of making money for the charity, I understand you've taken up the challenge, and you're going to be doing your 2.6 on Sunday. What's the plan?
Well, John, you say I'm taking up the challenge. I've yet to work out a way of saying no to Mike. That's my problem. I think that's everyone's problem connected with their ability. So he asked me if I get involved with this, and it is an absolute honour to do so, as I said. And he talked about the 2.6 challenge. Clearly, with another marathon this weekend, a lot of charities are going to lose revenue they would have got normally. So Mike asked me if I'd do the 2.6 challenge. I'm actually in training right now for a charity ride later in the year where I'm doing with the Royal Air Forces Association, which we might be able to touch on towards the end. So one of my rides, and I'm doing it all virtually. So I'm on a turbo trainer linked up through Swift and Strava. And you don't get the break, you get normal cycling, so it's much, much harder. So what I'm going to do this Sunday is I'm going to cycle 26 miles on my turbo trainer. And I've set up a Just Giving page already, which is now at the bottom of the screen very kindly. So please do have a think about it, and please do support. Now, obviously, I never led the Red Arrows, so I'm a little bit worried about cycling 26 miles by myself because I'm used to following someone. So I've reached out and I managed to get a couple of people on board to cycle with me, both of whom will be very, very well known to Air Ability. The first in the guise of Martin Pert, so current leader of the Red Arrows, Red One. You'll have seen him, the star of stage and screen in terms of the North America tour, doing a sterling job. We have a mutual secret between the pair of us, which I promise will stay buried if he rides with me on Sunday, which he's going to do. And then there's another rider. And the other rider is also a former leader of the Red Arrows and a really good friend, close friend, Mr. Andy Offer, known to many of you from times through the Reds, if not through the Reds, of course, with the Blades aerobatic team, to Excel, who I know have been very good supporters and contributors to the charity Their Ability. So both have dug deep and elected to join with me. So the three of us will be cycling together over 26 miles on Sunday, hoping to raise as much money as we can for Air Ability. Now, I've started it at £26, and it's obviously been met very graciously by both you and Mike. Whilst it would be great if everyone contributed £26, I absolutely understand that could be beyond people's means or wishes at this stage, but anything that you can contribute, please do to make some good money for the charity.
No, that's wonderful, Gary. No, and thank you thanks for your powers of persuasion as well with Perty and Offo. I know that as you rightly say, they've been brilliant supporters of the charity, and one thing about charitable fundraising is profile, actually, and so because we depend very much on the aviation community at large, whether that's corporate or people just putting a pound in a bucket at the Farnborough Air Show, it all adds up, and we are a small charity. And we too have had to make some hard decisions to really guarantee survival in these uncertain times. So, Gary, thank you, and thank you to Perty and Offer as well. I'm sure they're listening. Well, should we get on with it then? Because we've got a lot to get through. So, when Gary and I were talking earlier this week, we wanted to try and touch on the highlights, but whilst we are all very interested to learn about some of those unique experiences, perhaps in command of a squadron or indeed of the UK air component in Libya, how about some of those softer things? You know, what inspired you, Gary, to get involved with aviation? What are your earliest memories of wanting to learn to fly?
Yeah, so I come from a Royal Air Force family. My father was in the Royal Air Force, long distinguished career, and left in his late 50s as a warrant officer, and he was a warrant officer engineer. So very much being part of the Royal Air Force was in my blood, and indeed my mother's father was an Air Force engineer as well. My father's father was a little bit disloyal. He was in the Royal Navy, but aside from that, we've got sort of a thoroughbred in terms of the Royal Air Force. So being part of aviation, being on an air station was always just in my blood. That unforgettable smell of jet fuel, which anyone who's ever smelt it knows there's nothing quite like it, and the noise. Even today, I can't stop myself looking up in the sky when I see an aircraft. So I've always been interested. I've always been a fan. I enjoyed going to some air shows. As a youth, I particularly remember going to an air show, I think it was in the late 70s, at Wildenrath, and it was the last show with the red arrows where they flew the gnat. And it was just incredible. And I think without the guise of the Military Aviation Authority, the rules were certainly more lax in those days. And some of the fly paths, some of the displays still stick with me today. So I had that, you know, living on an Air Force base, being around aircraft from a very, very young age. And then I went to school, both from a primary school perspective around air station, then secondary school. For that era, I sort of then went back home over the summer periods, and I'd go down and spend a little bit of time, if I could, on the squadron with my dad. And I remember just going down some evenings, watching Jaguars doing engine runs tied down, and even at full reheat, I'm not sure they had to chock it because the Jaguar never had that much power anyway. But yeah, watching that, and then he moved on to Tornadoes. My father was the first warrant officer on 9 Squadron Tornadoes, for which he received the MBE for the 7-year stint he did setting up that first Tornado Squadron. And I spent a bit of time there with him as well, just learning more about it and really enjoying it. And then whilst at school, I was member of the Combined Cadets Force. So by age 16, I had a glider's license. By age 17, I had a private pilot's license. And it just became something that I definitely wanted to do, to pursue my ambition to become a pilot.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I think in terms of inspiration, I think, you know, there's many people I've spoken to who've had the inspiration come from family or perhaps the organisation they were involved with, whether it's the Scouts or the Air Training Corps. You know, we should really pause and just very briefly talk about the UK Air Training Corps. I mean, it's apparently the largest youth organisation in the country. I think topping something like 35,000 children. My daughter is a member of Biggin Hill Squadron 2427. Have to give them a mention. But it really is, isn't it? It's those grassroots experiences which can shape someone's life. And I think certainly back then, the exposure to aviation in the Royal Air Force must have been the catalyst for many a youth.
Yeah, so I'm president of, again, I have to mention them, 2248 Squadron, which is the Rutland Air Training Squadron, which I became president of when I was the station commander at Cottesmore. And it's just incredible. I think it's over 40,000 now, actually, the strength of the Air Training Corps. And
Right.
Yes, it's great to give them an interest in aviation. Yes, it's great to maybe entice them into the service, but it's not naturally a recruiting tool. I think what's really good about the youth cadet movement is it teaches people discipline, it teaches children leadership, it teaches them essential skills in life, such as first aid, and to be responsible citizens. And every year or so, or at least every year, I go and visit 2248, and I'm always overwhelmed by the quality of the people, the quality of the volunteer staff, I have to say, that keep those kids coming back week after week, and seeing them from young 13, 14-year-olds all the way up until they leave at 18, 19, and what they've achieved and how that set them up for their life is just really remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and well, talking of leadership and discipline and entry into the Royal Air Force, I suppose for you it began at Cranwell. Give us an insight into how that started.
Yeah, so I boarded for my secondary education from 11 to 18 up the road at Grantham. So I live just on the south of Lincolnshire in Stamford. So I sort of left school in the summer in Grantham and then rolled into the Air Force in September 1985 to start my initial officer training. As a young, very fresh 18-year-old straight out of school. Because it was at the end of the university period, most of the people that went through the officer training were graduates, and there were very few of us who were schoolboys. One of the other schoolboys, again, very well known to the charity, Al Bridger, who director of flight for British Airways. So Al and I were one of the few schoolboys. And we went about our training, the officer training, where they teach you the skills of leadership, becoming an officer within the Royal Air Force. And in those days, it lasted from the end of September until the middle of February, where we then graduated as acting pilot officers, and there were about 150 in our intake, and then moved straight on to the flying training. And I remained at Cranwell to do my flying training, and I was 19 by this stage, and I had all of about 38 hours behind me in a Cessna 150. And the next stage, I find myself motoring forward the electric canopy on the Jet Promise Mark V, with a blue ring of confidence around the tail, going off on my very first sortie, which was scary and quite claustrophobic as an experience.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I mean, and going pure jet pilot training as well. So, no sort of easy piston entry besides what you've done beforehand. And so on that Jet Promise training, then, at what point in the basic flying training does the Royal Air Force determine your ultimate direction? I think they call it streaming. Is that determined at the time? Was it determined based on your competency on the Jet Promise, or give us some insights into how that progressed beyond that initial platform?
Yeah, sure. So at the time, what we had was basic flying training stations at Church Fenton, Linton-on-Ouse, and at Cranwell. And I was at the school at Cranwell. And then there was the advanced flying training, which was at Royal Air Force Valley for fast jets, or the Rotary school, which was at Shawbury, and of course still is. And then there's a multi-engine school, which was up the road at RAF Finningley, now Doncaster Airport. And just following the fast jet stream through, if you then got out of Valley, you would then be posted to one of the two tactical weapons units, RAF Brawdy, down at sort of southwest Wales, or RAF Chivener, known as Heaven in Devon, just outside Barnstaple. So for me, you initially went through a sort of a package with everybody else on the Jet Promise Mark V to get to the point of streaming, where you were streamed Group 1, which was fast jet, Group 2, which was Maltese, or Group 3, which was helicopters. So everybody joined effectively to be a fast jet pilot. And then in the first basic package, which consisted of general handling, navigation, a little bit of formation flying and some instrument flying, they would then work out how good your hands were, how good your mind and your head was, and then stream you. And it was also known as the money trick, because in those days, your flying pay started once you'd been streamed and went into the next applied phase. So it's still in my logbook in the bookcase, a little pound sign by that trick, because that's when you started to get a pay rise, as you then started to earn your flying pay. So after that streaming, there would then be separate packages, and you'd stay together as your course at Cranwell, and you'd then have a different syllabi. Either if you go into the multi, you do a bit more instrument flying, or if you go on the fast jet, more of a concentration then in the low-level navigation, where we'd increase the speed from 240 knots to 300 knots, where the world really rushed past in those days. You do more formation flying as well, and some tail chases to start understanding that third dimension. So I sort of graduated from Cranwell with a recommendation to go to Valley, to Group 1, Phase 1. We then moved up to Valley to 4 flying training schools, it was at the time, onto number 2 squadron, and underwent the package there. And at the end of which, when we're now talking November 1987, you were awarded your flying wings. So the course, and we're still really good friends. So again, Al Bridger and I were on that same course and the same basic flying training course. We received our wings as acting pilot officers. I think Al and I were both aged sort of 19 at the time, maybe 20. And after a small break, we then both went, I think Al went to Broady and I went to Chivner, which is the tactical weapons unit. So up until you get to the tactical weapons unit, you've been taught how to fly the aircraft, how to do formation flying, how to do navigation flying, and how to do some of the real sort of intricate procedural work. When you get to the tactical weapons unit, this is now about how to operate the aircraft. It's now given that your hands can fly the aircraft. You now need to think how to operate that aircraft. So that's where a combat was introduced. That's where you would then not only just do low-level flying, but you would then go out and you would try and hit targets. Bombing was introduced as well, using practice bombs at the range at Pembrey. And then during that course, you were then streamed for the fast jet aircraft that you would fly. At any stage during that training, of course, you could fall off the escalator going up and be streamed onto either helicopters, fast or multi-engined, or indeed be chopped. For me at Valley, navigation was a little bit of a hurdle for me. And I went through, I failed my first ride, I failed my second ride, and I got up to my chop ride with the station commander, a guy called Group Captain Ian Dick, which I passed. But for me, it was quite scary because everything I'd done was all about now devoted to being that fast jet pilot. But I scraped through the third one and then got my wings and moved on to Chivner, which is there the final streaming takes place to the fast jet that you're going to go and fly as a career.
And so essentially through your entire initial training, you're being looked at, you're being assessed. How did that weigh on you? I mean, it's obviously you're obviously with your cadre of people in your group. You can rely on each other, but ultimately you have to rely on your performance. How did that weigh on you through that 1 or 2 year period?
John, it was incredible, and particularly I probably walked out of school with less A levels than I perhaps should have done, so I didn't really have a plan B. So it was all or nothing for me, and I was absolutely devoted to doing it. And I didn't know whether I was good enough. I've always been somebody who's just worked as hard as I possibly can and the hope that that will be good enough. But I didn't know, and nobody knows. If I put you in a car now and asked you to drive around Silverstone as fast as you could, you wouldn't know whether that was good or rubbish. All you will have done is given your all. So for me, going through training, every time I got airborne, I had to do my all. And that wasn't just flying, that was the preparation for it, learning the checks, learning procedures, learning what's expected of me, and having the right attitude with the instructor. You mentioned there about the course. Of course, we were all in this together and we're still bonded. The course we were on, 63 course, we have our own WhatsApp group and we talk very frequently. Amongst that, we get together socially. And that's decades later. And during that course, when one of us had a hurdle, the others would always crowd around and say, hey, how can we help you through this? Al and I were best. We were the only two schoolboys on the course. The rest were graduates, and they were and they'd done a lot more flying than we had. Very used to the RF procedures and the RF ways. So Al and I very much lent on them to start with to help us get to where we did. But the pressure every day was immense. When I got close to my chop ride, I'll never forget failing the second nav test, and it's called a final nav test for good reason. And I remember sitting out on the balcony at the squadron at Valley, virtually in tears, my head in my hands, thinking, this is it. My dream is over. I'm age 19. My dream is over. Now what am I going to do the rest of my life? So the pressure was immense. It never really got any easier as we went through the whole of the training, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, you did give it your all, and you were able to fulfill that ambition, and you reached the point of streaming. Now, I know in the Royal Air Force there's a certain amount of tomfoolery when it comes to the actual platform you're going to end up flying. How did that happen? And tell us how you were introduced or advised which aircraft you'd be flying on the front line.
Well, clearly, I suppose in those days you're allowed initiation ceremonies, weren't you? But it was something akin to that. But actually, for my condition, it was slightly different because as I went through the tactical weapons school, at the end of that, they'll stream you to go 2-seat or single seat, and then depending on or how good you are on the single seat side, whether you were going to go at the time Jaguar or Harrier. and it was just a slightly different skill set to go Harrier. Because of my size, there were doubts about whether I'd fit in the cockpit of a Harrier. So about 2/3 the way through the tactical weapons unit, where for me it all came good in terms of the applied side, and I could really work out what I wanted to do, and I was able to use the aircraft rather than just fly the aircraft. The instructor came in and said, "Hey Gary, you're doing really well. We think you're going to go single seat. If you'd like to go Harrier, we need to take you to Wittering to size you in the cockpit because you're too tall." So I did one of the sorties, and we landed at Wittering, taxied in, shut down, and we walked into the hangar, and we sat in the cockpit of the GR3 with the doctor to see whether I'd physically fit in or not. In those days, we had brown flying boots and black flying boots. Brown flying boots had a slightly smaller heel than the black flying boots. And all the guys down at Chivney, Harrier blokes, say, "Right, when you go, wear your brown flying boots because you need all the help you can get." And sure enough, I wore my brown flying boots, and the doctor kind of looked at me, looked at the rake of the seats, where the canopy was, and said, "Yeah, okay, I think you'll fit." So that was me signed off. So I went back to Chivner. I still had the rest of the course to go through. The very next trip, I failed. It was the biggest slap in the face I could have had. And to this day, I still don't know whether I was really bad, almost probably, or whether the instructors were just slapping me down because none of the rest of the course knew where they were going, whereas now I did if I passed the course. That said, of course, when we had our roll disposal at the end, there were the line of pint glasses. There were ridiculous challenges and spinning around a broom that I had to do, and then drink the pint. And I knew I was going Harriers. And of course, the first one had F4 on the bottom of it. So I knew I then had to continue. And I think I'd got through about 3 pints before I finally had the one at the bottom, which said Harriers.
Fantastic. Well, so you get the aircraft that you wanted, you get your dream posting. First impressions of the aircraft. I mean, it's clearly an iconic aircraft, but not everybody knows what it's like to get in the cockpit of one, let alone fly it. So give us what were your first impressions when you got onto the OCU?
I was scared witless, to be absolutely honest, utterly scared witless. So the OCU at the time, you did 3 trips in a helicopter to learn the art of hovering, totally different to actually hovering in a Harrier. And then you pitched up at the OCU, the Operation Conversion Unit, and you did 2 trips in the 2-seater. None of it was hovering. It was just getting airborne normally, conventionally, and then landing with the nozzles at 60 degrees, which is probably the easiest way of landing the aircraft. The acceleration was phenomenal. Even towards the end of it, flying the Harrier, I would always just be blown away by the acceleration. So you did 2 trips where you effectively water skied behind the aircraft and occasionally climbed in the cockpit and flew it. The instructor would let you do everything until it got a little bit out of hand, and then you could feel him on the controls. And then at the end of the second trip, he said, "Right, you're off by yourself." So you then climb into a single-seat aircraft, which I've never done before at any stage during the training, much lighter, the same engine, but obviously a power-to-weight ratio, which was far different. You'd climb in, you'd strap in, the air intakes would be sat behind you, you kind of sat in the engine, and then you've got no choice but to slam to full power at the end of the runway, and then you're just off. And the next thing, you're up at about 10,000 feet, wrestling for control of it. So that was my first experience, frightening. Then you go very quickly on to learning how to hover, which is an alien existence. And I think there was 2 joules or maybe even a single joule. And it's only 15 minutes in duration because you can't have too much fuel on board. And you press up and down, and then you go off and practice it solo. And then gently, over time, they build up so you can then fly the aircraft. The conversion unit at the time was split half into learning to fly the aircraft, pretty much as of going through Valley, and then you learn how to operate the aircraft. Flying in a single seat, we had done that anyway in terms of learning to do it by yourself, but flying in a single seat aircraft, we hadn't. But then over time, it all starts to become naturally. The training system is exceptional, as it is, I know, today. And then at the end of it, you get the coveted Harrier badge, which you can only get having completed the whole of the conversion unit, and you're sent from there onto your frontline squadron.
And so in terms of operating the aircraft as it was designed as a weapons platform. Give us some insights into the role of the aircraft, and then how you were, where you ended up in terms of when you made it to the front line. There's obviously Royal Air Force Germany at the time. We're in the middle of the Cold War, as well as the RAF in the UK and Belize. So give us some perspectives on that.
So I joined out number 3 Fighter Squadron in Germany, and at the time I was at RAF Gütersloh up near Hanover, when Gütersloh was an Air Force base. And I joined 3 Squadron, and the role at the time, and it was just around as the Berlin Wall came down, it was still the Cold War. We were doing many field deployments where we'd go off and live for a couple of weeks in a field in Germany somewhere in an army training range. We would live in tents under canvas, get airborne, do half-an-hour trips where the mission would be to do close air support on the front line of our own troops, and then rush back, quickly rearm, refuel, and then go and do it again. And we'd do about 6 of those trips a day, just sat in the cockpit, getting sandwiches brought to you while the engineers rearmed. You'd plan everything in the cockpit, never get out. And then each night you'd then sit round, eat a little bit of Stilton cheese, drink a little bit of port, which was kind of the thing, all sit around the tent together, and then fall asleep, wake up the next day, and you just carry on doing that for a couple of weeks. During my 4 years that I did in Germany, the role of the Harrier changed because the Cold War had gone. But at the end of the first Gulf War, we then got very heavily involved in the Middle East. And the Harrier's first operational deployment was Operation Warden, where we were based out of Turkey, flying air policing and watching missions over northern Iraq. And that saw the Harrier, this is now the GR5 and the GR7, change from being a short-range close air support aircraft to probably doing longer-range reconnaissance and air interdiction. Each of those sorties would be about an hour 45 to 2 hours, supported with tankers. So we'd go out to Iraq and then we'd come back. At the same sort of time, the German low flying system closed. So if we wanted to do any low flying, we had to come back to UK. So again, we were now going from an Air Force, a Harrier Force that just flew 30-minute short sorties, to doing hour 45, hour 50 trips, doing some high level and some low level. And that's when the medium level bombing started coming in as well. That's a really bad photo. And that's the medium level bombing started to be introduced as well. So the skill was not only in the low level domain, but it was also in that medium level domain.
Yeah, and it's it's the genesis of the multi-role, isn't it? That's the sort of the period of time when the Royal Air Force was reducing its numbers on the front line, and obviously to where we are today with these very capable multi-role aircraft. But if it wasn't for the Harrier and those like it, we wouldn't have perhaps learnt those valuable lessons. And of course, talking of learning valuable lessons, display flying was something that was introduced to you on the Harrier Force.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. So whilst I was in Germany, I went away to a few air shows as kind of the spare pilot with legends such as Mark Zanker. There was a picture of Zan earlier, and Spike Jepson, of course, a former leader of the Red Arrows himself. And so I went away and I thought, I quite like this because it's something different, because it's communicating with people that you don't normally get to see and talk to. And also you can become the public face of the Royal Air Force, and just go out and meet people. And at the same time, get to fly the aircraft in really interesting places and doing things with the aircraft, which for me was a bit of a boyhood dream. So when I came back from Germany, I went onto the staff of the Operational Conversion Unit at Wittering as a qualified weapons instructor, having done the course midway through my German tour. And in '95, whilst on the OCU, the display pilot that year was one Flight Lieutenant Andrew Offer. And I became his spare pilot and followed Andy around for the year, taking a spare aircraft with him. And at the end of the '95 season, Andy was selected and joined the Red Arrows. And then I stepped up and I did the Harrier display for the '96 season. I flew some 65, 70 shows during that year, as far as field as Poland and Cyprus. And of course, and I think this is where the video is from, actually, from the Farnborough Air Show in '96. So a great privilege, a real enormous privilege. Took it to grass fields, Goodwood Grassfield, Warehouse, Middle Wallop, as well as sort of big international airports to then go on display at different venues. So a real privilege to fly the aircraft, to display the aircraft. Challenging. It's not the easiest of aircraft to fly, particularly in the translation from forward flight into the hover. And with an interesting mix of winds and surfaces to operate from, there was never a dull day, I can assure you. But definitely, I look back on that as one of the highlights of my aviation career.
Yeah, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And of course, that brings us to the next chapter, which is having had a taste and perhaps being prepared in the best possible sense. You would have applied to the Red Arrows. It's something that's not offered to anyone unless they come forward. What's that? Well, first of all, how did you what was going through your mind in terms of what to do next? How did you come about wanting to join the Red Arrows, and what was the process of application?
So by the time I sort of displayed the Harrier, I had a feeling, a naive feeling, that I'd done everything I wanted to do on Harrier. I'd flown the aircraft, displayed the aircraft, I'd flown in operations, I'd met some amazing people. My time in Germany was just brilliant. I met my wife in Germany, came back with a wife and a daughter, and a tax-free car, of course. So my life was complete, and I thought I need to do something to keep my enthusiasm. I enjoyed flying. I enjoyed the challenge of display flying, and I felt that, you know, the Reds, I'd never had an aspiration to join the Reds. I never thought that I'd be good enough. I'd always looked up to them. I'd seen them at air shows as a child, and I'd seen them at air shows that I'd sort of been going through training, but it appealed to me. So I thought, why not? Let's just give it a go. You had to be classed above average. You had to have 1,500 hours, and then you could apply to join the team. Having joined the team, and I'll tell you the process you go through, I look back a year later when the next tranche of people came to join the team, and to be honest, I've no idea how they let me in, because it seemed to be stringent. But you applied, and there were about 50 people in my year that applied to join the team, and there's a short list then of 9 people. Those 9 people, at the time, we went to Cyprus, and we spent a week with the current team. And in that week, you flew in all of the back seats from 1 through to 9. You had an interview with the boss of the Red Arrows and the commandant of CFS, where you had to sort of remember that your favourite colour should be red and your favourite number is probably 9. But they sort of got into why you wanted to do this. They weren't really interested in having somebody who wanted to showboat, somebody with a very large ego. What they wanted was people that could knit and gel together as a team. And then you also had a flying test where you put in the back seat of the exec. So I flew with Mark Zanker and John Rands in the lead, and you'd get airborne and you'd do a loop and a barrel roll, another loop and a barrel roll, just to see how your hands were. Nobody was very good at the start. The idea was that you could demonstrate a learning curve. So I'd like to say that I pretended to be rubbish at the start and good at the end, but I just tried as hard as I could throughout. And then probably the most important aspect was you lived with the team for a week, at the end of which the team decided whether you were good enough to join them. And by being good enough, how can you work together as a team? How do you respond to criticism? What are you like as a leader? What are you like as a follower? Because without those qualities, the Red Arrows wouldn't be the people that they are and have been throughout the whole of their tenure.
Yeah, and I think we're looking at some video here from 1998, and this is you over Scampton. Would this be one of your practice sorties, or do you recall what this might have been?
Yeah, so I can actually. This is actually what we'd do. We'd fly the Blues, so the engineers without which none of this would be possible. The Blues, the Circus Blues, we'd each have our dedicated engineer that would fly in our back seat with us. We would take them and fly a first half show to give them experience of actually what we're going through. So this is in '98, during which time I was flying in Red 9. So as you look at it there, sort of the back left of the diamond, and then Red 8 that this year was squadron leader Andy Offer. So Andy and I were 8 and 9 together down the back, where I described it to a chief of the air staff at the time as a jungle with bits of aircraft moving all over the place.
Yeah, I'm sure it would have done. And in terms of your memorable moments, no doubt this question has been asked countless times, but when you got the red flying suit, and any highlights that spring to mind.
Yeah, never forget that day where you are deemed good enough to be a Red Arrow and you get to put on the red flying suit. We clearly then had a great party, as happens every year, but then you're straight into the summer season. 3 years, during the 3 years, I did 2 Far East deployments, going as far afield as Langkawi in Malaysia, through India and Pakistan and Oman and Saudi Arabia. And when you left UK, you became the Great Britain brand. And you may have seen that on the documentary from the Reds in America this year. But we were really proud to do so. And it was really good meeting people all over the globe who wanted to see a little bit of UK. And you were there representing your country, representing the Royal Air Force, and also representing your fellow team members. And that's probably, when I look back, the highlight for me is just that continuum of working with a dedicated bunch of men and women, not just the people in red suits, it's the people in the blues, the engineers that support, and all the admin staff that go with it. Without any one of them involved, it would all just ground to a halt. Some of the highlights, I was really fortunate. We had a lunch engagement with the Queen Mother in '99 as the millennium approached, and I had about 10-15 minutes just chatting with her with what she was going to do for the millennium. Just amazing. And then even today, the flying experiences, I can remember what it was like displaying at Foy. I can remember what it was like displaying at Fairford. I can remember some of the fly pasts we did, sitting on the wing of Concorde for the opening of the Parliament in Edinburgh. Just absolute great vignettes that I'm really privileged. I get to keep those with me forever.
Yeah.
And it's great to be able to talk about. We could talk for an hour just about that, I know, John.
Yeah, I know, of course. No, well, fantastic memories, and perhaps we should do something some other time to focus in on those experiences. But for now, you move on from the Red Arrows and you take up your first command with 41 Squadron. What we'll do, we'll fast forward, because one of the things that I think a lot of people will be interested to hear is some of those experiences in command and leadership, and I think we should look at that at the back end of the career, and we can factor in that first experience of command with 41 Squadron, moving through your Harrier and Typhoon force command roles. But what we'll do now, we'll just fast forward to your time. I think it may have been during your time as a Typhoon force commander when you were involved in the UK Air Component Command for Libya. A fascinating insight, I'm sure. Do share. Where did it all begin for you? Did it begin with a phone call?
It absolutely did, John. Absolutely did. In fact, it was the back end of my time at Cottesmore. So we had the final fly past, we'd had the final parade to close down the force with as much respect, laying an icon to rest as we did. And that was kind of the back end of January. And then I was just minding my own business, concentrating on running the station down to close the station at the end of March. We went to a wedding, actually, middle of March, to a good friend, Ian Wood and Lizzie Nichol, in London. And we were driving back the next day on a Sunday afternoon, and the phone rang, and it was an Air Commodore at Group. He said, "So what are you doing at the moment then, Gary?" I said, "Well, I'm closing the station. I'm a little bit busy." He said, "Right, your work's done there. I need you to go to the Permanent Joint Headquarters as a group captain because we're about to start Operation Ellamy. It's about to kick off in earnest, and we need to up gun and be able to work 24/7 in that operational headquarters." So I went down there, and a guy called Johnny Stringer was there for filling the role of a group captain. So I went in to work alongside him, and I did that for a month. At the end of that, I went home, and we were moving out of our house at Cottesmore into another house in Stamford. I literally got home at 9 o'clock in the morning to find the last of the removals men coming out of the house, and it was the bed which was the last thing going to the wagon. We then got to Stamford, and I was literally carrying the first box off the removal men when the phone went again. So, "Gary, can you come and work in MOD, please? With all the experience you've just got, we now just work with the crisis centre in MOD, which is where we were doing all of the briefing slides that were going across the road to number 10. We were going across to some of the Cobra meetings and then the National Security Council meetings to brief the Prime Minister on how the war was going and what else we could contribute. And I did that for another 3 weeks. During my time there, they said, right, Gary, what we need you to do now, we're going to promote you and we'll send you out to Italy because we want you to become the United Kingdom Air Component Commander to effectively look after all of the UK air effort in the contribution into the NATO operation. Real wow moment for me because coming from, a previous background with the Harrier, flying the Harrier, this was a real step up to me because this was now a matter of life and death, people's lives in my hands, and also the protection of the Libyan people under the UNSCR in 1973, we were charged to do, and doing it in a multinational campaign. So a real big challenge, without a shadow of a doubt, the largest challenge that I've faced in the whole of my Air Force career.
And give us an insight into the timelines. I mean, from that initial decision to act to the point where, we had our men and women conducting operations.
So incredibly quickly, it's well worth, if you have a moment, going back and either Wikipediaing and looking at how it sort of ramped up in terms of what Gaddafi was doing. And I think the breaking point was Gaddafi was about to storm into Benghazi and committed to cleanse the population. Those that didn't agree, he was going to cleanse them. So definitely something the international community couldn't stand by and watch. What the international community hadn't done and NATO hadn't done was galvanise around how it was important to do the right thing. We had the backing of the UNSCR resolution. So France and UK took a real bold step forward. Within, I think, in fact, Sammy Sampson, the station commander at Coningsby, will probably tell the tale that they were in a dining-in night on a Friday night when the call came. And within 24 hours, they had typhoons down at Joya de Col ready to contribute. And tornadoes, of course, were being used for complex storm shadow strike missions from Marham down to the southern Mediterranean, releasing the storm shadow missiles and then flying all the way back to Marham, a feat which was repeated fairly regularly throughout the whole campaign. From my position, once I was initially involved with it, then being out deployed at Enjoyer, was really ensuring that we could maximise the contribution of not only the typhoons and the tornadoes, but under my command, we also had the airborne early warning aircraft, the E3Ds, we had the Sentinel aircraft, and we also had the Nimrod R1, which was extended in service to contribute, to keep the contribution going. And all of that sustained by UK, from UK, with people like 2MT and the logistics and the constant trawl of the VC-10s and the TriStar tanker support, without which we couldn't extend the range, and the C-130s and the 146s and the 125s, all just digging deep and performing on the operation. And I have to say, when I took command, we didn't miss a beat. We just kept going every day, 7 days a week, even when the squadrons had to rotate because they'd done their time. Because it's important to remember, Typhoon Force at the time are still doing quick reaction alert. They're still defending the UK 24/7, 365, and the tornadoes were still engaged in Operation Herrick out in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Really big operational tempo, and the demands on them were placed in such an extent that they just didn't miss a beat and they carry on going. And likewise, the tankers were contributing around the globe, as were the Sentinel aircraft, the AEW for NATO missions, and the Sentinel as well had been involved up until quite recently in operation in Africa.
And was this the first time that such missions had been conducted of this type of duration? I mean, it must have had its own unique challenges in terms of the mission duration, the fact that you're launching from the UK. Can you give us some insights into what you had to overcome to allow that to be possible?
Yeah, so for a tornado mission launching and recovering to the UK, having enough tanker brackets to ensure you've got air refueling to keep you topped up, and it's when you're flying and you are doing air refueling, it's not as simple as filling to full, draining the tanks, stopping at the petrol station, and then keeping on going. These sorties are at night, they're complex, a lot of them are in cloud, so it's difficult to find the tanker, it's difficult to stay with the tanker. What you also need to have is always enough petrol that if something goes wrong with the aircraft or you can't take fuel, you can divert to the nearest suitable airfield. Now, when you're armed with Storm Shadow, there aren't that many suitable airfields. So the guys had to make sure they were topped up with fuel the whole time as they went around. It's a really complex logistical effort involving international coordination as well, because you're flying through international airspace, and it's clear that the job that you're about to go and do, we were lucky both with the support we had within Europe, in France and Italy, all of the countries, within NATO supporting us. And then from the deployed option, where we had the forces, and I'll talk about the fast jet force, principally, based out at Gioia, an Italian base, doing long sorties with targets that they probably didn't know they were going to hit when they got airborne. So they'd get airborne maybe with an idea of where they're going to be tasked. And what we were charged with doing under the United Nations Security Council resolution in 1973 was upholding the right to protect of the Libyan people. So the aircraft would find themselves sitting in an orbit, sitting in a hold, until they could see, or they were talked onto by the Predator unmanned air vehicle or other imagery or intelligence, that what was happening on the ground was that there were Libyan pro-Gaddafi forces inflicting violence on the Libyan population. And then, and only then, they'd be called into to neutralize that threat so that the Libyan population would remain to live and fight another day. And it was all about creating the conditions to allow the Libyan people to decide for themselves who was going to govern and lead them versus the reign of oppression that they were under and the threat of genocide.
Yeah. Now, and one of the things that was very apparent to us all was this was being played out on the media, and there is intense scrutiny now on the collateral damage, and rules of engagement. Give us some understanding of how the rules of engagement and your constant focus on maintaining public support in terms of collateral damage and the rules under which you operated by, how did that affect the way that the planning was undertaken and all the way down to the actual mission itself?
So John, that's a really good question, really complex question. It's really good. So first up, it wasn't just UK. So let's say if UK decided we didn't mind about having a large casualty threshold or a collateral damage threshold, or even we didn't really mind about bombing areas of scientific or World Heritage sites, had we had that attitude, we were all of one cloth. So actually, it was the whole coalition that would have lived and died by what we did as a single nation. So first and foremost, it was really important to know that we could only do what had agreement from the whole of the coalition, because what we couldn't risk was one of the partners, one of the nations having to walk away because they didn't agree with what's going on. You're right, throughout the whole campaign, the casualty threshold was 0. What that meant is we had a 0 expectation of causing any civilian casualties. So you had to make sure the intelligence was as good as it possibly could be in an area that was very difficult. And wherever you could, you would look at the target before you took action if you had to clear the ground around it with known parameters to satisfy yourself that you wouldn't inflict any civilian casualties. Mm-hmm. And the ones we were using from the first Gulf War and from Kosovo crisis, where we were using cluster bombs, we were using dumb 1,000-pounders, we'd entered the era probably of 2011 where we were being accurate. Being accurate means you want me to hit that building, I can hit that building. But we were now moving into an era of precision. And precision is different from accuracy. Precision to me is not about hitting the building. It's about hitting the floor of the building that you've been asked to hit. It's about being absolutely precise and delivering the weapon effect that you've been asked to do, as opposed to just being accurate. We're really lucky. And we're really fortunate because we put a lot of effort and thought, and the bomb, such the Paveway 4 bomb, which can arrive at a target at a moment of your choosing, at an angle of your choosing, and its fusing means it can go off at a point of your choosing from Airburst all the way to once it's been through many layers of the target. So you could be precise as you possibly could be. When I reflect, is it possible that some civilians were killed? I think it's I wouldn't say it's a certainty, but it's probably a high probability, because all you can work on is the information you've got at the time to make that most difficult of decisions. And it's a balance. And you're right, there's a lot of stuff which goes on in the press about casualty thresholds, about some of the work and some of the conflicts we've been working in Iraq, in Syria and Afghanistan. But I can absolutely fundamentally assure you, each and every time, it doesn't matter whether it's an unmanned air vehicle being operated from Nevada or somewhere in Lincolnshire, or from a pilot and Wizzo that's up above a target, absolutely every single time any kinetic action is taken, any life is going to be taken, the scrutiny that goes into is ensuring that you're not going to cause any other civilian casualties unless you have taken the decision to do so, because in order to do so, it is worth the military effect of taking that risk. But in the time of the conflict I've been used to, from time in Libya, that wasn't the case.
And isn't it fascinating how the technology has enabled that to occur? I mean, if you look at the Second World War, the carpet bombing, it's really it's a reassuring way in which that scrutiny is really pressed upon all levels for us as the great British public, to know that people are being stood to account. So that's very, very interesting, Gary. And of course, that's 2011. Meanwhile, back in the UK, the country's preparing for the Olympics, and there was another job on your hands. Now, would this have been during your Typhoon Force Commander tenure? Tell us a little bit about that period, and going from high tempo operational theatre in Africa to your home turf.
Yeah, very interesting. So operations on the home soil, and it was a theme I was going to have to get used to, because of course afterwards I became officer commanding one group with a parallel responsibility for the security and the defence of the United Kingdom airspace. So I came back from Italy back end of 2011 after the conflict finished. I had a little bit of time off. I got reacquainted with the family, had a look at the house that I hadn't really seen since we moved into. And then I got rolled into working for, at the time, AOC1 Group, Stuart Ather, to be the Deputy Air Component Command for the London Olympics. And the picture you see there is a Typhoon landing at RF Northolt. We put 4 Typhoons forward to Northolt as a forward quick reaction alert base. And my job was to oversee the orchestration, the execution, the planning of the air security plan for the Olympics, which involved not only Typhoons, it also involved helicopters, Pumas, and Lynxes based from HMS Ocean and inside London, as well as E3D surveillance platform, and then close in Javelin missiles and Rapier missiles to protect the Olympic Park. Really difficult job, because London is probably some of the busiest airspace in the world. Heathrow runs at an 85-90% capacity. And we needed to do all of this whilst remaining hidden out of the limelight to enable Londoners to go about their business, to keep Heathrow running, but having the ability to press pause on the air traffic throughout the whole of London, launch a Typhoon out of Northolt, get to the potential renegade aircraft to dissuade them from flying towards the Olympic Park or the centre of London. It's something that's practiced and is done day to day by the Typhoon Force in their responsibilities for quick reaction alert, not only to deter long-range aviation from Russian aircraft coming, but also from the counter-terrorism. And we've seen that operation being enacted on more than one occasion. So it's a responsibility the Typhoon Force is used to shouldering, but they weren't used to doing it with the response times we needed to be able to allow as much of the airspace to work normally. So the trigger point of the exclusion zone was much smaller than it would have been normally. So therefore we had to have assets further forward, which is why we had them based at Northolt, and they would get airborne within 5 minutes. 5 minutes notice they were airborne. So throughout the time, the opening and closing ceremony, I worked for Stuart Ather, who was AOC at the time, and he was the air component commander. He was his deputy. He either had the confidence in me or he wanted to enjoy himself. So he went to watch the opening ceremony and the closing ceremony while I was down in the bunker. But during the Olympics itself, I got out and I saw the Javelin deployments. We also had observers all the way around, sort of just inside the M25, in high-rise flats, sitting there with binoculars, and they were plotting targets they saw coming in. It was all then fused together so that we could get the mast controller at high wickets, where we controlled it all from, to have this effective security, and allowing people, which were the bumper sticker, to enjoy their safe and secure Olympic Games. And it worked. Yeah,
no, it did. And I do remember the media certainly gave you the recognition that you deserved, at the time, because it made us, it was a very proud year for us all, wasn't it? Not least did we feel safe, but we also had, had our nation in the spotlight. And of course, that moved neatly into your AOC1 group role. So we talked earlier on about, cashing in on the experiences you've had, that have gone previously. This is perhaps a good time now to talk about, leadership and command, the way in which the Royal Air Force prepares someone to take command of a squadron, as you did, back in the late 90s. So give us some, your path into leadership and command, and then we can talk about your tenure at High Wycombe as AOC1 Group.
Yeah, thanks, John. So leadership, again, there's another hour's worth, isn't there, in this, without a shadow of a doubt. Talking through leadership, you learn a lot from leadership of others. When you initially start, you learn how to be a good follower, and I think followership is just as important as leadership. And it doesn't matter if you are the notional leader; everyone will have to find themselves being a follower at some stage, even no matter where you are. And having that skill is great. They say that you learn more from a bad leader than you do from a good leader when you're sat back and watching them. I think that's true. And that way, hopefully, I've educated an awful lot of people through my time. They've been very good on me as I've gone through. And I think, and we talk very glibly about the integrity that sits behind as an absolute rock stone. If I think leadership, I think integrity. Being dependable. What do I mean by being dependable? People can read you, rightly or wrongly. People should be able to read you like a book, and should be able to second guess what your reaction is going to be for a given circumstance. Because if you're like that, that generates a better followers. People that work around you can know. In my mind, there's nothing worse than a leader that just veers and hauls the whole way, and you never really know where he is at the stage. Going through all of my training, of course, right from the start, as a young junior pilot, 22 years old on a frontline squadron, I might be leading a sortie, and the squadron boss or the station commander are in that sortie. When you get to the debrief at the end of it, you're stood at the front and you're telling the station commander actually what he did wasn't the right thing to do. And you can back that with your facts because you're the leader of the formation. Now, of course, respect because the position he holds, and therefore there's rank in that debrief, but it's quite classless. And then I look at my time in the Red Arrows. That is where teamwork and leadership for me came absolutely to the fore. Each of us had secondary duties. None of us checked what the duty was and if they were doing it, because we knew it would be done. Because if we didn't do it, then the team would fall apart. So having that team ethos, having that leadership is so important. And there always has to be one person in charge for me. I think the leaderless exercises never really work because you have to have someone in. I don't care whether it's me or whether it's you, John, because I was going on a sailing holiday next weekend with somebody I didn't really know at all, and with Andy Offer, actually. And I was really looking forward to it. And the guy we were going with was going to be the leader because he had all this sailing experience. I've got no difficulty with that at all. I'll tie knots, I'll make tea, I'll look out, I'll do whatever he wants me to do because that's my role and I've got that role designated to me. So going through the training, of course, and going through my career, each position you get to, I remember not being ready for it. I remember phoning Yvonne, my wife, from the gates of Coningsby, saying, I'm about to be a squadron boss. I'm really scared day one here. And of course, what we think when we start a new company, when we start a new job, is everybody in that team that's accepting you, we all think, everybody sat there going, okay, let's see what he can do. Oh, he's come from the Reds, has he? Oh, he's a big shot. Let's see what a mockery he'll make of this. The truth is, everybody in that team is sat looking at you going, oh, go on, Gary, we're here for you, we'll help you, we'll support you. And yet you don't feel that as a person because you're sort of you want to make your own mark. So actually learning how to lean on others in those formative days until you're ready to take that position of authority and start making the decisions, I think is a rare skill that everybody needs to try and adapt to wherever they can. Because the more you can take, because then what you think, what you're building is a team ethos, you're working together. Without a doubt, you're the accountable person, you're the person in charge. So you're going to get the kudos for it, or you're going to get in trouble when it doesn't work well. But you know, it's such a journey, and you never stop learning. I think, you know, my time as the station commander at Cottesmore, that's probably one of the biggest leadership challenges I had. 19th of October, 2009. That's it. There's no more force. There's no more squadrons. There's no more capability. Put them all to bed. To take people through that 2-month journey, to be able to get to the stage where we flew that 16 ship, we retired the aircraft with the grace it needed, we got the right jobs for the people, was a real challenge for me in leadership and communicating that as we went through it. So all of that then helped me to sit there as AOC 1 Group, in charge of Air Combat Group within the Royal Air Force, where the role was all about leadership. And all of the jobs I'd done up to that stage prepared me well. I'd done staff courses, I'd done some leadership training, but leadership's a personal thing. I used to talk about leadership, and the first slide I had was a whole list of doctrine books you could read about leadership. I said, alternatively, the next slide was just the Nike emblem of just do it. Because unless you're doing this from within yourself, of who you believe in and what drives you, I think it's really difficult to get it right, because you pretend to be someone you're not. We all know our strengths, we all know our weaknesses, and I think the real gain with leadership is to exploit your strengths, don't be afraid of your weaknesses, and learn how to mitigate your weaknesses by picking other people in your team to help you out, and learn from them as much as you hope to impart knowledge on them.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating perspectives there, Gary. And of course, as you say, I mean, you know, things do come to a head. I'm gonna just raise this photograph though, because what Gary did is provided us some pictures, dug deep into those dusty photograph albums, and this one is interesting. And there's another one, Gary, as well, Mike, I'm not sure if you can find it, of the selfie. But Gary, perhaps you could just describe this photograph, and then Mike, if you can find that other selfie picture, that'd be great as well.
Yeah. So my last job in the Air Force, I pretty much describe my career now in the outside world as I've had two halves to my military career. Up until 2010, I was a pilot and a leader, working up through the ranks until I was the station commander. After that, it was all about leadership and higher command. And this culminated in my last job before I left the military. It was a joint job, so it's across the whole of defence, and it's a competitive job a competitive process to get into the role. And I was the chief of staff, so the deputy chief of joint operations at the permanent joint headquarters based down at Northwood near London. The role of the permanent joint headquarters, known as PGHQ, is to deploy, command, sustain and recover UK forces on global operations anywhere around the world in a joint context. So it was my responsibility to plan them, and it was my responsibility to execute those operations. As a result of that, I had to go and visit many of the operations. The first picture you saw then is one of the operations we had going in Saudi Arabia, helping the Saudi Arabians with some of the training. And that was me, in terms of defence engagement, talking to my Saudi counterparts. This photo here, Yarin, his name, Brigadier Yarin, and he was in charge of 60 Brigade of the Somalian National Army. Clearly, as you can say, we're a similar sort of vintage, and we became quite good friends. He's had a very interesting background, if you think he's been in the army in Somalia for decades. I know that he lost one of his children through Al-Shabaab terrorism attack, and you know, all credit to him in the way that he dealt with that as an individual, in the way that we would expect him to, from a discipline and legal focus that we enjoy in UK, but could be very difficult and different in countries such as Somalia. So I travelled to Somalia, and we were helping them out with their 60th Brigade in the northern area with their training, becoming a better nation. I travelled to South Sudan, I travelled to Mali, Niger, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Everywhere I went, really proud of what the United Kingdom was doing out on operations across all the services, from the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and not forgetting, of course, the civil service that work alongside defence in amongst some of these dirty and dusty places. So a highlight of my career to go back out with, I mean, 3 years, always good to go out on operation, see the Royal Air Force, but an absolute education and an honour for me to see the other arms of defence working equally as hard as the Royal Air Force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely, and I can only imagine the professionalism of the Royal Air Force to enable that to be executed. And of course that's something that's part of the training back at day one, as we discussed earlier. So a very interesting perspective, Gary, in your career. Thank you for what must feel like your life whistling past you in an hour's time. So thank you very much. And of course that brings us on to why we're here today, and your focus on charities. So give us some insights into your involvement with some of the charities that we've already discussed today.
Yeah, so I'll come back to airability, but first, if I can, I want to talk about Royal Air Force Association. So Royal Air Force Association, one of the two Air Force charities, there's that and the Benevolent Fund. I've been ambassador for the Royal Air Force Association for some 4 or 5 years now, and I'm also a befriender. So as an ambassador, one of my roles is to go out and extol the virtues of the charity, which is really easy. The Air Force Association, welfare-based, and they bring probably about 87 pence in every pound direct to the point of need, which is really good, as you'll know, from a charitable perspective. They reach out to the whole Air Force family of yesterday, of today, and tomorrow, and they address specific needs from a welfare perspective. That ties neatly into the role and the work I do with them as a befriender. So the role of a befriender is you get allocated someone who might be lonely, just needs to reconnect back with the Royal Air Force and needs to talk with somebody. My first friend was a guy called Ted Rexter Baker, lived in London, unfortunately passed away at the age of 97, Spitfire engineer during the Second World War. Out of North Africa. Unfortunately, he had his medals stolen before I got to know Ted. One of the things we managed to do for Ted was we got some replica medals and we represented them to Ted at RAF Northolt. An amazing day. I got as much out of my friendship with Ted as I hope that he got out of me, having me alongside him to rekindle him within the Royal Air Force. I've got a friend, and there's a picture of Ted now at the end of the medal, and that's a photo of us with me presenting the medals. An amazing day, it really was. And I've got a friend now in Stamford, and particularly at the moment, it's really important to sort of outreach and talk to people. And what RAF are doing now, they've got this thing called Operation Connect, to support the most vulnerable. They've got 4 strands of it running. Project Outreach, where they're just their telephone service to check on the welfare and just keep up with people. Also, Project Helpline, which is reaching out to people who didn't think they were lonely and isolated, but now are because of this. So they're reaching out and they're talking to them, just really to chat, that friendly voice on the end of the line, or that friendly face if you can connect. They're also doing Project Bag Drop, going out dropping bags for people who can't get out and shop themselves. They're on a vulnerable list. And then they're doing Entertain. So I'm doing an interview with them next month. They've got quizzes running, and I wrote sort of a book review for them. And then I'm also doing a charity ride. Every year I do a charity ride for them, a bike ride. We ride 100 miles, had 150 last year. We're hoping to get 300 this year. But of course, because of lockdown, what I've elected to do is do it virtually. So a small band of people, we're going to be the RAFA Reds, I think. There's going to be 9 or 10 of us in it. Purty's joining in, Dunk Mason's coming in with me as well. And we're aiming to raise as much as we can by cycling 100 miles on turbo trainers, which is actually going to be a bit of a painful thing to do, I can assure you. And I'll let you know, having done 26 miles, of course, for airability this weekend. So airability, why is it important for me? Well, I got involved with airability to start with. It was on, at the time, knowing Andy Offer and I was invited along to one of the functions. But to be honest, it was Simon, my brother, who really sort of kindled my interest. Simon, as you know, worked with the charity, organised the round the world PA28 trip.
Yep.
I got involved. I got airborne without takeoff clearance, which I don't think Paul ever let me forget. And it was a great experience with having people like Chris Evans, Buzz Aldrin involved, Rory Underwood, lots of notables, a really good thing. And it got me understanding what air ability did, which is great. But I think it's always good to personally connect with a charity. I'm very lucky. I'm able-bodied, and I can get about, and I don't have the need for a specially modified aircraft. But in 2014, I broke my leg really quite badly. And I was, sat at home for 3 months, unable to put weight on it. And as part of the rehabilitation, I ended up doing some water aquatherapy. And when I went into the pool and it was up to my chest, I could walk again. And up to that stage, I hadn't been allowed to put any weight on it. I hadn't been allowed to walk. I was going with, walking around on crutches the whole time on one leg. Actually being in this pool enabled me to walk. And for the first time in my life, I just got an inkling, about that much of an inkling compared to some of the problems that people face and overcome and fly with their ability. I got an inkling of what it was like, having been prevented from doing something that I'd taken for granted. And actually being in the water gave that gift back to me to be able to walk once more. And it gave me a real insight into what it's like for people that get involved in air ability. We all know how free the third dimension is and what a gift it is. But I think what a fantastic charity to be able to take people that ordinarily wouldn't be able to experience the third dimension, let alone fly solo in the third dimension, is a real gift. And it really underlines the great work that's done on air ability. And there is my brother with a little bit of facial hair, but more hair up top. It's now got, that's for certain. Bearing in mind he might be listening.
Gary, those really are wonderful words, and we do often talk about giving back, don't we? And it really is very satisfying and enjoyable to see people's lives changing before your eyes. I mean, one or two experiences I've had with air ability is seeing the family unit go flying with that individual as well, and it affects positively the people around that individual, there's people who've learned to drive because, well, if I can fly an airplane, what else can I do? And every day, we're changing lives at Air Ability. No thanks to people like yourself, Gary, and Perty and Offo. So, well, look, we're an hour 20 in. We could spend another hour 20, I'm sure. I did promise some individuals that we would get to the questions. And then you can have a well-earned beer, Gary, or a rest from all that talking. So we got a question here from Rachel Broxton. She says, what has been the highlight of your career? And then the second question is, what's been the hardest situation you've been faced with as well?
So the highlight of my career, it's really difficult to cherry pick one of those out as to what is the highlight. There are many peaks of my career. I think probably if you mix together, now you all know me, a mixture of leadership and a mixture of flying and a mixture of wanting to be with people. The highlight of my career, although it was a very sad day, was probably leading that 16 ship on the 15th December 2010, taking the aircraft into retirement and taking on my shoulders the responsibility of the Harrier family right from 1969 all the way through to 2010. To orchestrate it, and Dunk Mason helped me in terms of the formation and setting that up, but to deliver that on live television in some grotty weather, including the hover and the bow, and walk away with our heads held up high, all 16 engines closing down at the same time, will remain with me forever. And all of the challenges that went through that, and it seems quite almost wrong to have that as the highlight of the career, but without a shadow of a doubt, it probably means the most to me and will stay with me forever. The other part of your question, what's the most difficult decision and a difficult circumstance I had, I think it was I'd probably take you back to Libya. We had conducted some strikes as part of the coalition, and it was a result of intelligence that we had had from the UK. So it had been a UK-inspired target, if you like, that the coalition had gone out and struck. Unfortunately, after we struck it, reports came out of Libya that we had inflicted a lot of casualties, 70, 80 casualties, I think it were, that we had inflicted. And there was then on national television playing out from a Libyan perspective, there were bodies being taken out of the rubble. And then we got to see from the Predator feed that was over Libya, we got to see a lot of the coffins and the funerals taking place of these 20 or so at one stretch. I remember counting them. It was awful, and we felt such a great sense of remorse that our intelligence had been wrong. And from UK, quite rightly, UK wanted to scrutinise it and make sure that what we were doing was the right thing. So whilst all that was going on, I had to step into a target board to clear the next round of targets. And it was really difficult, knowing all that was going on in the background, but having to absolutely maintain the aim and concentrate on everything as if it was business as normal. I remember, taking myself outside the port cabins and just standing there, looking through the barbed wire fence out into the distance, questioning the decisions I was making, questioning what I was doing was right. It wasn't the right thing. It's awful, the civilian casualties. It transpired that actually it had been Gaddafi propaganda, and we hadn't inflicted those civilian casualties whatsoever. They had actually taken bodies out of a mortuary and taken them to the target that we had bombed, and were pulling them out to create that propaganda effect. So we were, and we carried on doing everything we had done through all the diligence and the scrutiny. But I think when I look back on the whole of my career, that will be the one moment where I felt I was doubting the decisions I was making, but I had no choice to do the right thing, both from my personal perspective, from a UK perspective, but also from an international perspective. A heavy weight on my shoulders for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Rachel, great question. Thank you for that. And here we go. Scariest moment in a cockpit.
Well, again, I've got lots of those. I've got great memories and I've got scary moments. I think, so just a few. As a young junior pilot, literally arrived on a squadron at the end of the Gulf War. Gary, can you deliver a spare part down to Naples, please? Because the Chinook is on the way back to the Gulf War and they're stuck there. So can you go and deliver the spare part? Go back, get some kit in case you stay overnight, and I'll sort you out for your flight planning and everything. So I went back to the mess, got my kit, came back. They'd got the Met brief for me. They'd got the maps, and he go, Garrett, just get airborne. So I got airborne. Hadn't really read the route or anything. Flew down to Naples, and in Naples they tried to make me do this complex arrival. I said I'm a bit short of fuel, so I sort of landed, taxied in, out the baggage pod, came with spare part. The Chinook crew weren't there. They were down the beach. They weren't there and the guy involved, I've never forgiven him. And I flew home. When I flew home, I flew into thunderstorms. And to start with, I climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed. And in the end, the thunderstorm came out to meet me. The radios failed because of all the static. And I ended up being spat out the side of this thunderstorm, burning more fuel than I wanted to, got home on fumes. At the end of the day, it was the wrong spare part I delivered. So I found myself operating in the northern bit of Iraq, and I had a generator failure, which then turned into a complete electric failure in the aircraft. And I started to sort of point my way home. So I had no idea where I was in terms of a map, in terms of a compass. So I was using a bit of the sun. No one else could see me. The AWACS couldn't see me. My wingman had lost me. So I was at the stage of, well, I'm going to run out of fuel here. And really interestingly, with the Harrier, of course, you've got an option of landing on a road. And all the bombs were on board. The aircraft was really heavy. And I remember flying along, and the diversion airfield was in Turkey, an airfield called Batman. And I thought, well, Batman's out there somewhere. I'm going to fly along until I get to £2,000 of fuel. when I get to £2,000 of fuel, I've decided I'm going to find a road and I'm going to land on it. I mean, I'll write a book after it. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
But once I'd made that decision, it was no longer a scary place because I knew how I was going to deal with it. And I found Batman and I landed and I came back afterwards. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because even in these dire times, that's where military training comes in. It's really good. I've had a lot of scary instances that could have been in cockpits. But the training is you put your fear to one side. You haven't got time for fear. You've got to get on and deal with the task at hand. And then you can open that fear box afterwards because it will need to be unpacked. You'll need to rationalise it in your own mind. But I think the time with the Reds, you know, some of the shows were great, some of the really hard work. But each and every time, then once you landed, you're there with the crowd line signing autographs. You've got to forget about that trip because you'll debrief that later. So a few scary moments, but dealt with at the right time properly, and then opened up afterwards to debrief, as it were.
Yeah, fascinating, Gary. Right, we'll go to the last question, and then I'll bring Mike back in. So, favorite aircraft you've flown, and why? The aircraft you would always wanted to have flown but never got the chance.
So it's got to be the Harrier, hasn't it? It has to be the Harrier. It has to be because, you know, the Harrier was different to any other aircraft you'll ever fly because of its ability to hover. You know, secret, we can all say this now, the Harrier's gone from UK inventory. Every other frontline aircraft would get the most out of their fuel and then they'd come back and just break into the circuit and land. For the Harrier, you'd always come back with a little bit of fuel so you could play around in the circuit, or to say properly, you could exercise your skills in the circuit to make sure you could do those vertical landings or those slow landings. But it was enormous fun and enormous challenge. So the Harrier will always remain as the best aircraft, the most favourite aircraft I could ever fly. Aircraft I would have liked to have flown, the F-35 Lightning. Very fortunate in my job as AC-1 group, I flew the simulator on numerous occasions. You can get out of that simulator and step into the aircraft. The level of fidelity, the training is so good these days that actually you don't need to have the two-seat aircraft, which is why we don't have many Typhoon, we don't have the F-35. Flying the F-35, using the systems, seeing how it operates, with the bonus of being able to hover at the end of it, you know, why wouldn't I have wanted to fly that aircraft? I'm really envious. You know, friends of mine such as Stu Campbell now flying the F-35, you know, and Harrier friends of mine as well that have now gone on and flown that aircraft. Really lucky, an incredibly capable aircraft, and that's going to be with us for decades to come. So that's probably the aircraft that I miss, that I really wish that I could have flown.
Well, what a point to finish on, Gary. Thank you so much. From my perspective, it's been insightful. It's been fun. I suspect this isn't going to be the last we hear of you. And as you rightly said at the beginning, I think once anyone says yes to Mike Miller-Smith, then you can't say no. So thanks, Gary, for all of your efforts today. I know it's taken some time out of your busy schedule. That's it from me. Mike, I'll hand it back to you.
Well, thank you guys for a really fascinating chat. Genuinely, that was really, really good. So thank you very much. And it really just falls to me to say thank you for all your support, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our Inspirability chat today. For me, that was brilliant. I'm sure it was for all of you as well. It was great to see those live comments coming through as well. So thank you for that. And Gary, good luck for Sunday. Thanks you so much for your support. Thank you to Bertie.
Thank you to
Bertie and to Offo as well. Thank you, guys. The link for the challenge is on the screen now, but also even easier on the Facebook stream and the YouTube stream. If you just look under where the video is, you should see the whole link there. You can click that, go through, and support us if you can. So thank you very much. So on that note, I'll leave you to the rest of your Fridays. And we look to see you very soon on the next Inspirability. Talking of Bertie, on the 9th of May at 2 p.m, we're going to have a chat with Bertie. So that should be great fun as well to hear about the Reds and particularly the recent North American tour. So let's look forward to that as well. So until our next meeting, thanks very much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks again.